Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 156 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. My name's Tim Robertson, and I'm the host of the podcast and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thanks for downloading and listening. The Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomena, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. This podcast depends upon donations from our listeners to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear, you can donate to it via Patreon. You can start off by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook, which is the official handbook of the training program. And for $35, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can find out more by going to www.patreon.com/observersnotebook. And if you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $18 a year. Find us on the internet at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And we're also on the Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And this podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. And if you really enjoy what you hear in the podcast, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now, episode 156 of the Observer's Notebook. Enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this edition of the Observer's Notebook podcast. And today we have a special guest. We have Charlie Warren, the managing editor of Amateur Astronomy Magazine. Welcome to the podcast, Charlie.
Well, thank you, Tim. I appreciate it.
Yeah, now, before we get into talking about the magazine, let's talk about you, okay? Give everybody a little bit of background about yourself, location, occupation, observing equipment, things like that.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, been in the security industry for a while, but my background really is as an entrepreneur. I go back into Miami. My degree was electrical engineering with a dual with applied music. And I decided that wasn't my cup of tea, bought a bookstore in Miami, Florida. Got married, opened a wholesale plant nursery export company.
Oh my goodness!
so needless to say, I've touched a lot of bases, and ended up selling all that, going up to North Carolina, taking some time off, came back to Florida, and really that was when I kind of entered the realm, other than my early experiences under dark skies as a kid. Which probably leads into this whole thing. I had an unusual childhood, and my dad was a teacher, and at one point he sold our house and moved us all onto a boat in Miami, which is a little different way to grow up. And in the summers, we'd cast off the lines and cruise the Bahamas and Virgin Islands and during the summers, because he had the time off. Not a bad, trying to get back to that lifestyle.
I hear you. That sounds like a pretty decent way of life.
Yeah, it was terrific. But it was pretty, we didn't have generators. So at night, we would sit out under the stars, literally enjoy these incredibly dark skies. And I guess another tie-in was we didn't have GPS, so my dad taught me to navigate using a sextant and ship's chronometer and compass and charts. And it gave me a love of charts, which persists to this day, even with all the electronic media available and the great things we can do. I love a good old-fashioned star chart.
Yep.
Anyway, so at night we'd lie out, we'd look at the stars. My mom, would tell me the constellation she could remember. My dad would elaborate on the Greek mythology behind it. I think for entertainment purposes, he'd stretch some of those, but it made good entertainment. And towards the end of summer, I would enjoy the Perseid meteor shower under just unbelievable, pristine skies. And it left, I think, a positive impression on me that, much fast forward, way forward in life, at some point it resonated. And I got a telescope back in there. Interestingly, I've got my first telescope as an adult, the same year that Tom Clark started the magazine, but completely independently. And at one point, my wife bought me a little ETX 90, and I began to use the star charts and the ETX to kind of teach me the sky. So instead of just relying on the go-to to show me stuff, I actually would put a finder on top, and it was an expert tutor that taught me where all this stuff was. And I attended my first star party, Texas star party, back in 2000. And that really launched me into it's the first time I had experienced those same dark skies or similar dark skies to what I had experienced as a kid. And from there, the rest is history, so to speak. I kind of got bit by the bug in a big way. So,
wow. So would you say the experiences of being on the boat at night was really sparked your interest in astronomy?
Yeah, yes, I think it. And it's interesting because when I get new subscribers, I ask them a little bit about their background, and there does seem to be a common element where there's something in childhood that later on, when they have some disposable income and time, that resonates. Either somebody showed them, that typical stuff. Somebody showed them the Saturn or the moon in a telescope, but there's an experience as a young kid and a certain amount of, I think, interest in the natural sciences that combined with that lead them to our hobby. And so I think it's not totally uncommon, but yeah, there's definitely something that resonated to what I consider to be a very good time in my childhood, and a curiosity for the dark night skies.
That's very cool. And you said your first telescope was the ETX?
First, actually, before that, I had an unwieldy 10-inch Newtonian on an equatorial mount, which didn't get much use because it was kind of big and awkward. The little ETX was something I could set up after work in just a couple of minutes, get it polar lined, and do some observing. And I began to do that on a regular basis. And so, yeah, that little telescope really kind of brought me in. I started to, download these astronomical lead lists and began to plow my way through it. And like I said, the telescope was actually pretty accurate go-to. I would look through the finder, find out where I was on the star charts, and really began to teach myself the night sky.
That's very cool. And I've looked into you a little bit, and you're quite the astrophotographer as well, aren't you?
Yes, that started to happen, which is an interesting thing. So I went to the Texas Star Party. At that time, I had upgraded to, I still kept my ATX 90 because for a fast setup, but, to the big brother, the LX 90. And I brought that out to the Texas Star Party, and those guys just blew me away. But I tried to image with a film camera. It was just when, really before digital started to break. And I was phenomenally unsuccessul with that.
There's a lot of patience involved with film.
Yes. Well, guiding with a reticle eyepiece, and particularly with that equipment, it was a big fail. But while I was out there, I met a guy, Gary Honus, who had a 20-inch Star Master. I later bought a 20-inch Star Master, but not only did we have great observing, but he had this little Olympus camera, and he would take 30-second shots through just handheld through the eyepiece, or maybe he had something that I think he made some kind of a bracket to hold it there. But I was like, I was trying to sketch. I was trying to, take images, not doing well. I was sketching, not a phenomenal sketcher, but it did teach me to see better.
Right.
But I was just blown away by these little 30-second images that he was getting through his 20-inch Star Master. So I said, well, the heck with the film. So I got one of the I got a Starlight Express 7, SX7C, I guess. So a color astronomical camera. And that started me kind of on the imaging thing. And I got bit pretty hard with the imaging bug, and that sent me in another way. But I've always have and continue to enjoy doing observing as well. Once I get the equipment set up, I want to look at stuff in the eyepiece. So
you got into astro imaging really when it was starting out in the hobby, from film cameras to imaging, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So you've seen quite the evolution over the years.
Oh, yeah, just phenomenal. And it's amazing. I mean, one of my buddies, when we were getting started, also had an MX7C, was Warren Keller, who's now, quite well known for his imaging prowess and his processing and teaches things. But yeah, John Talbot also. So there was a neat core of people that got together and were just starting off doing horrible stuff as far as by today's standards, but having an absolute blast and helping each other and learning from each other. And it was truly a great community, and we forged some friendships that just continue to this day. And so really a neat time early on. But yeah, the equipment compared to what is possible today and the equipment today, it was truly very rudimentary.
Yeah, I see images by amateurs like Damian Allis and Go and people like that, and I don't know if it's through the Hubble or it's an amateur. It's like the images are just so amazing right now.
It truly is. Yeah, some of the planetary stuff they're doing by just grabbing the best frames from video frames, solar too. I mean, just it's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I'm just every day I look at images that people send me. I'm like just blown away how incredible it is.
Now, you mentioned a few people, but was there one person in particular that really sparked your interest?
One person?
Yeah.
There was a group of us, but interestingly, I mean, there were a number. I'd say Gary Honus kind of started me off and took me under his wing. Rick Singmaster, who later made me one of the Starmaster telescopes. He would sit and chat. Rick was famous. He'd just sit around and chat with you forever. On the imaging front, John Talbot, Warren Keller, Alan Chen were all people that gave feedback and encouragement. And interestingly, Tom Clark also became a bit of a mentor. I met him for the first time, interestingly, also out at that 2000 Texas Star Party. He was a speaker, and I spoke with him briefly afterwards. Never got to know him that well, but I started subscribing to the magazine way back then immediately. I was like, oh, this is great. This has got stuff like about what I'm doing.
Right.
So, I subscribed, later got to know him well. When I moved back to Florida from Dallas, I did some research, found out, hey, he had this Chiefland Astronomy Village, and that's where I would go monthly literally every new moon and image and observe. And there was a really nice community of people that would show up every new moon weekend. So we had like mini star parties every month. Got to know Tom Clark very well. And of course, he pulled me in, taught me things about telescope making and observing. He never got into the imaging thing. So.
Wow. Now, I want to start talking about the magazine a little bit, but before I do, I want to apologize. I've been an amateur astronomer since the early 70s, and I did not learn about this magazine until earlier this year when John O'Neill sent me a copy, and I went, where has this been my entire life? It's a great magazine. So I immediately subscribed. I'm like, oh, I got to get this. It's just, it blew me away because, it's not like Seidentop or Astronomy Magazine. It's not the technical versions and stuff, but it's written by amateurs basically. And I really, it's excited me. And I've been wanting to get you on the podcast to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, neat, and I'd love to get that feedback, and that was my reaction too. And again, I've always subscribed to astronomy and Seidentop. I get about everything I can. I'm a magazine junkie anyway. Same thing with photography. I love magazines. I'm a reader. But when I first read Tom's magazine, I'm like, this is just different. It's geared a little different, and it fits a nice niche.
Yes, it does.
You're right. And we want to try and keep that niche a little bit different, covering a little bit different angle, written by amateurs, and covering the stuff that isn't necessarily as commercially viable. And really, that's our niche. We don't have to, sell 60,000 copies on a newsstand. You just can't do some of the things that we do and do that. So
magazines are dying out now too. So it's like
It is. It's a very tough time for publications altogether. I mean, it really is a challenging time with costs going up, advertisers moving to more web-based advertising. So yeah, I sympathize and empathize with people publishing magazines. It's not an easy thing at this point.
Yeah, I know. Within the ALPO, our number one expense is our journal. And it goes out 4 times a year, and it's averaging about 100 pages an issue right now, and it's just crazy expensive to do. It's nuts. But let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about the origin of amateur astronomy. So, what can you tell me about how it started?
Yeah. So Tom Clark is the founding editor, and back in the early '90s, Tom got sucked into the whole astronomy thing. Funny, a whole other time to tell that story, but it's really amusing. Anyway, his wife, Jeannie, was really the one who pushed him. And he started out being the telescope porter. But anything Tom does, he likes to do big. So he got a big telescope and realized, oh my God, this is bigger than I thought. But got into the whole observing thing himself, then started, he was a retired machinist, started building telescopes. He was the owner of Tektron telescopes. And so in the early 90s, his favorite publications were Deep Sky, published by David Eicher, and Telescope Making by Richard Berry, both one former, one current editor of astronomy now. And they were small press publications, one focused obviously on telescope making, the other observing, the two things he loved. And then again, it's tough to have a small press publication.
Right.
Both of them ended up stopping publication. And Tom said, well, he kept waiting for somebody to fill in the gap and nobody did. So in spring of 1994, produced his first magazine, Amateur Astronomy Magazine, a whopping 34 pages, and essentially combined those two things, amateur telescope making and some observing articles. And that was the initial launch, really, as those other two publications came to an end.
So your target audience, what is it?
Target audience are people who are active in the hobby, I would say. We're not really an armchair astronomy publication. We're people who are out there in the field that are imaging, building telescopes, observing, doing outreach events, going to star parties. And those are really the activities we try and focus on.
Okay. All right. And from those early days, how has the magazine evolved over the years?
Well, Tom was not the most technical. So back, and I had started going, like I said, to the Chiefland field on a regular basis. I started to contribute. I believe my very first article was, I was still in Texas and I got invited to observe on the McDonnell Observatory 84-inch telescope for a night with 11 other observers from the Dallas Astronomy Club. And it was just blew me away. I mean, it was a phenomenal experience. We observed literally from dark till dawn, and this long list of objects through that spectacular telescope, an amazing observing instrument. And so I wrote an article on it, and I'd done some sketches and that type of thing. But that was my very first contribution for the magazine. Well, again, I was still in Dallas, moved to Orlando area, Popka, and started going to Chiefland, got to know Tom, started to write a few more articles. And over a period of time, Tom was like, hey, I'm ready to retire. Gosh, you'd be a great candidate to take this over. I'm like, well, I don't know if I really have the time. I had a pretty time-consuming day job. And he kept working on me. And my day job had an opportunity to morph. They wanted to move me up to the Northeast as a director for Brinks Home Security, and I didn't want to move back to the Northeast. I'd gone to school up there. I was born up there, but didn't want to go and live back up there. Anyway, so I made a transition, had more time, so I took over the magazine with issue number 55. And
how long ago was that?
That was issue 55. Fall of 2007 was my first issue that I took over. And so immediately I did a couple of things. I produced a digital version of the magazine and made that available. And Tom realized that had, one of those things that just had to be done. One thing was, and it continued to get tougher and tougher, is just the cost of shipping overseas to our subscribers overseas out of the country. And the other is, and it was a decision that I made, kind of about the same time. For a small press to go, full color and do it well is really expensive.
Right.
And I did not want to degrade to get on that cheap kind of comic strip paper. And so I made a decision. I wanted to stay with high quality, heavier gloss paper in a black and white format, but I wanted to be able to produce color for those articles and certain things that do benefit from color and just a preference. So our PDF is in color. We still are black and white, but on a high quality gloss paper in the print version. So gave us a little bit of both and allowed us to expand our reach outside the United States a little bit more, very affordably. So,
and so it stayed that way since you took over basically the two versions.
Yep, yeah, it did. Of course, I'm into imaging, so I added a lot more of the imaging, but we try and keep some of the mix of ATM, observing, imaging, and we've always done a couple of things. We cover star parties, which to me is kind of, it's the heart of what we do, getting together with other people out on the field. You can do that on your own, but doing that together in community with other people, one, just the sharing of information, the camaraderie, to me makes this hobby very special. So we continue to cover that aspect of it as well. And the other thing that we've done since the very first issue is we feature an amateur astronomer. So people get to know kind of people in the hobby. And we've continued with that star people. As a matter of fact, I've expanded on it a little bit. So we used to give kind of like a really brief bio and cover 2 amateur astronomers in the early issues. And now we'll do, depending if the person's an astrophotographer, we like to feature their work. So we might go 6, 8, even 10 pages on different people based on what their interests are, whether, again, telescope maker, an observer, or an astrophotographer. But we try and hit kind of all the different reaches of our hobby and some different people and kind of give them a little bit of exposure and expose other people to what people, specific people are doing in the hobby.
Great. Now, how this is obviously a full-time job for you now?
This is, I still have a day job, which I'm getting ready to hopefully retire from shortly.
Okay. So do you have a staff that works for her, or is it mostly volunteers, or how does that work?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a staff, or is it mostly volunteers who do it?
I have a wonderful group of committed contributing editors and a very regular associate and contributing editors. So other than that, my wife and I do the hard lifting with the just the production part of it, but I absolutely could not do it without some of the terrific associate and contributing editors who do an amazing job producing content. So
great. Do you want to give some of those a shout out?
Yeah, absolutely. So, over the years, we've had Robert Reeves, who's known for his lunar photography. Of course, we have on the John O'Neill covers my solar section, and John's a good dude. Head up with the solar and does some really neat project stuff as well. So he, like I say, overall, it really has made a big difference in what we're able to cover on the solar side. But yeah, he'll do product reviews and everything else like that. We also have Dave Tosteson, who is probably second to none when it comes to large aperture observing. Dave does a really fun person to observe with. I just got together with him out at Okie-Tex, and he does a lot of research for when he goes out there and starts searching for some of these more obscure things, but does a phenomenal job covering that aspect of it. We have Harry Roberts from Down Under, and he'll do lunar and solar stuff. Dan Good, who does a lot of my imaging. Bill Williams, Richard Wright does a lot more writing now for Sky and Telescope, but he still does stuff for me. John Talbot is one of my people I lean on for a lot of the editing stuff. Richard Vanderbay and Bob Cava do some of my stuff on spectroscopy and variable stars. Roy Troxel, Chris Waldrop, both contribute on my sketching side. So Mel Bartels, who's pretty well known, will contribute a number of things on amateur telescope making and directs me to different people who also have great contributions. And Stephen Spears is, when it comes to spectroscopy, does a phenomenal job there, and also directs me to some other people with some great content in that regard. So I'm very fortunate to have a tremendous network of people in the hobby who are just amazing folks. And
that's an impressive list of it. That's a real impressive list of individuals too. That's to get them all working on this. This is great. Do you have a vision for the future for the magazine?
Yeah, I think about it from time to time where I would like to go. And I think I just want to, my vision really is to keep step with the hobby without losing some of the heritage items. I mean, it's harder to get ATM stuff, but I think it can be an important step for some people. And I think knowing more about our telescopes gives us a little more depth in the hobby. So I want to try and keep that as a part of our, not just our legacy, but an ongoing part of it. Part of that now morphs into just not necessarily building the whole telescope, but how do I upgrade and improve my telescope? But we'll continue along that lines, always be observers. I mean, that's the core of what we are. We are definitely expanding on the imaging front and some of the science introduced in science. And I'm working on now getting something that's a little more regular feature, since so many of our readers, and I think it's so important for the hobby, engage in outreach, something that might inspire people and give them a little more information. So I actually am working on another regular contributor who is very, very passionate about it, contributing something on a regular basis. So I want to keep pace with where the hobby is going, but really don't want to veer too far off of our current track, which is what these people out on the observing field are engaged in. So. Okay,
that's very good. Yeah, outreach really took a hit over the last few years with COVID too. I mean, I wasn't able to do any events. Our local astronomy club just recently, in the last month or so, started meeting finally together all of a sudden. So outreach really took a hit, and I missed it because I love doing it, and so it's hopefully the motivation get going again and people can start looking through telescopes in big groups.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And going back to what we talked about earlier, most people had some kind of an experience when they were young.
Yep.
That later they went back to, and it's really important, I think, that we continue to engage in that regard. And you're right. I couldn't go to schools and do outreach for several years. I used to love doing that, seeing the kids' eyes light up as they see Saturn's rings for the first time. And you never know when it's going to light a fuse. And there's one young lady locally that started, and then she started helping me with the outreach, and then she got her own telescope. She started doing her own outreach. And I'm not sure if she's graduated yet, but anyway, she's was a astronomy major at Caltech. So, I mean, sometimes you really do light a fuse. And even when you don't immediately, you just don't know what the effects are. And it also helps the teachers put some reality to what it is. There's so much, which goes to another realm. I don't do as much. I used to do some video, but I like to get the kids' eyes right on an eyepiece to connect in a different way. They're so used to looking at screens. Yes. I want them to have a more immediate impact from what they're seeing and what's out there. And the response is just gratifying. And I think it's very, very important that we get back on that course.
I agree. It's one of the most rewarding things I do in the hobby. I mean, anytime, like you mentioned, a kid looks through a telescope at Saturn, the first thing to do is walk around to the other side of the telescope and see if you have a Saturn hanging there or something. A slide on the inside. You're like, well, that's not really it.
And I think all of us who've done street outreach have had the guy. I remember when I was in Dallas, we were in front of a Barnes and Noble, and we did just that. I think I had a 10-inch LX, whatever. Anyway, one of the 10-inch Meade scopes. It was set up there, and we were looking at Saturn. And this older gentleman came around, and we showed it to him, and I explained how long the light took, and it was reflecting how it worked off the secondary and errors and everything. And he looked at me, and he goes, and so he looks around the front of the scope.
Yep.
And so I explained it again, and he goes, "You can believe that if you want to," and walked off. So not everybody will get it, but I think
nope.
But it is one of the great things about outreach is just the fun and the different reactions, and it's good stuff.
Yeah, that's fun. That's fun. So how often is the magazine published?
It's we're a quarterly.
Okay.
And probably will remain on that schedule, just based on it would have to go into a different direction to go even to a bi-monthly. So I think we'll stay on a quarterly, which seems to be a good pace to cover what we like to cover.
Okay. Now, what I like about it, you mentioned a couple different subscriptions. You can do the hard copy and the PDF version. What are the costs of those?
Okay, so the print version is $28 a year, $52 for 2 years. Our digital version, which is delivered, and it comes with a download link, so you can download a PDF, because they can put it on any device they want as a PDF. So we want to keep it from being too restrictive. Is $18 a year, $35 for 2 years, and a lot of our people now are actually doing dual subscriptions for $36 a year. So for another $8 a year, they can add the PDF, so they can take it with them, or they can also have the color content added to the print. Okay. So we try and keep as flexible as possible in that regard.
Now, are your subscribers worldwide?
Yeah, we've got subscribers literally all over the world. This year was the first year we shut down the mailing, the print copy. Actually, it was back in, I think, March, April, and finally we even stopped Canada because partly just economics. The mail rates were going up so rapidly I couldn't even project, and it just got to be almost unconscionable to mail it to Europe. Now costs over $10. So for a single magazine, the mailing portion of it. So most of them had migrated to digital at this point anyway. So we just recently shut that down. So we're all overseas. We're digital at this point. But yeah, we've got people in Australia, and of course, most of them are English-speaking nations, but we have a number of people. We've got people in Japan and a good number of people through Africa and Germany. On the continent of Europe, a good number of the people speak or read English anyway, so we have a pretty decent audience there.
Great. How many subscribers do you have?
We're about, and it seems to stay about steady because of our target focus, so we're right about 3,600. So.
Wow, that's good. Because it's it's a specialized magazine, and it's just like it's very niche, but that's a pretty good number.
Yeah.
And you do advertising in it as well. You sell advertising to help supplement the cost.
Yes, we do. We do take some advertisers. It amounts to, I think, somewhere at like 8 to 9%. So it's a mix that seems to work fairly well for us. So we're not totally beholden on it. And most of our content, so we're 72 pages, and we've got, of that, the vast majority is editorial content. So not too much advertising. By the same token, the advertising definitely helps us live, particularly in the print format. So
that's great. That's great. Anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about the magazine?
Trying to think what else. I think we probably delved into most of it. And again, invite them to give it a shot. If they get ed up with it, we do offer a complete back issue collection. Now it's offered on a thumb drive. And they can get for $100, they can get the first 110 issues we've ever published in a PDF format.
I need to order that. Okay, thanks for telling me about that. Because I love. I've eaten up the ones I have. I mean, they're just. It's like I said. I am shocked that it took me this long to find it. Thank God John O'Neill's out there.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And actually, if anybody listens to this podcast and they do order that, they just put in the little comments box, that they heard about it here, and they order that back issues. I'll take them right up to current for the $100. So give them a few extra copies, supplemental copies, and get our entire publishing history. And there's some, I tell you, way back at the beginning, there's some stuff that's still absolutely, incredible content. Obviously, the observing stuff doesn't change. Miniature, the ATM stuff is even very current. Mm-hmm. So there's some great content even going back to those early 1990s issues.
I'm sure ATM stuff is hard to get now, though. I mean, you mentioned that earlier because, I'm out here in the West Coast and we used to have the Riverside Telescope Makers Conference out here, and that's gone away 3 or 4 years ago. So and that was my introduction to making telescopes, seeing John Dobson and people like that out there running around making telescopes.
Yeah, it is. It's gotten to be a little more people now are doing the modification of their telescopes than the building, but there still are some people that are grinding mirrors and doing that, which is a really interesting thing to do. So I was looking back at the early, like I said, there wasn't a lot of advertising in the early ones, but when I look back at some of the prices of things, I'm going, okay, that takes you back away. Oh goodness! But no, there really is some good content even on the very early issues. So
okay, and you said $100 for all the back issues.
$100 for the 110, and if they mention this, we'll go and we'll get them the. Right up to 115. So
that's fantastic.
Bring them right up to the current issue. Yeah, we just published issue number 116.
Okay. Well, I will add your email address and also the website for subscribing to the magazine in the show notes, so people can click right there and be sent right over to you.
Perfect. That sounds good.
All right. Well, Charlie, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today. This is very enlightening, and I hope we can help you out.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me. So great opportunity to tell some other people about it. A small press, not easy to get the word out, as you can attest to.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. This is fun. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. Again, I want to thank Charlie Warren for coming on and telling us all about Amateur Astronomy Magazine. Trust me, people, it's a great magazine. I suggest you all check it out. We upload a new episode of the Observer's Notebook on the 1st and 15th of every month. You can also subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please rate and review us. I would really, really appreciate it. And we're also available on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, Amazon Echo, Spotify, and also on our ALPO YouTube channel. You can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon. You can give up to $35 a month, where you will receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. And with that, I want to thank the producers of this podcast, Steve Seidentop and Michael Moyer, for their generous support. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. You can contact me via email at cometman@cometman.net or on Twitter at @ObserversNBPod. Until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.